Thank you. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a study section of the Albion Council tonight, reminding you all to please silence your cell phones. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Barnes. Reed. Here. Brown.
Here.
Lawler. Here. Spicer. French. Here. And Mayor Brown.
Public comments. Persons addressing the city council shall limit their comments to agenda items only and to no more than 3 minutes. Proper decorum is required. Are there any public comments? Seeing none, items for individual discussion. Letter A, budget overview. Dr. Mitchell?
Mayor, Pro Tem. What we have tonight is a presentation in regards to the general fund and overview of the 2018 budget proposal. And I would like to invite Tom Mead, Finance Director, up to go over, give an overview, and we would welcome your questions.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tom Mead, Finance Director. And as Dr. Mitchell mentioned, it's that time of year again. Everybody loves the budgets, right? Because we're not doing, what I'm gonna try to do, because we're not doing any big drastic changes, there's not anything real different, I guess. I'm gonna try to just hit on some of the spots that have changed a little for one reason or another or whatever, but for the most part, just gonna try to go over if everything's kind of the status quo from the last few years. We'll kind of just go through it relatively quickly, and as Dr. Mitchell said, we'll certainly entertain questions. And I hope everybody did get a packet. It looks like everybody's got the numbers in front of them. So if we start on page 1, it says 1 of 25. That's the general fund revenues. A couple things I will hit on revenues. Very first line item, property taxes. Everybody kind of wonders what's going on. For the good news, I guess, first time since 2008, our taxable value did not decline. It didn't go up much, but it didn't decline. So I'm hoping that's a signal that we've hit the bottom, and maybe we can start seeing some recovery, hopefully, on property taxes. The other piece to that, though, is with the personal property tax reform law that came along. They are, of course, doing away with personal property taxes. So even though taxable values on all the real property didn't decline, we're still dealing with personal property going away, and the state is, of course, reimbursing us, but that is a very complicated formula, and it's very hard to kind of predict where you're going to come in, as we'll see here in a minute. The other item about underneath the first shaded bar there, which, by the way, for those that aren't used to the budget, the numbers on the far left, I guess some of you may be new to some of this. Numbers on the far left, the 101, that's our fund, our general fund. The middle 3 numbers are the department revenues, are kind of assigned 000 for the department. And then, of course, the next 3 numbers are account numbers, and that's in the far left column. But then the shaded bars, we can go in and put footnotes in if there's something that's materially changed or something kind of different from year to year, something that seems unusual, we can put footnotes in. So that's what the shaded areas are. So underneath the very first kind of boxed in there between the 2 shaded areas, there's income taxes. I just want to touch on that a little bit, because if you recall, last year we had made a decision to contract out with another company to help us collect a lot of our delinquent income taxes. And we hit a snag. Didn't have anything to do with that company. It actually had more to do with our bank. Just in short, kind of what happens, we allow all our corporate businesses to submit withholdings each payroll period through ACH. Well, the bank decided that they didn't want I don't know, they had something going on with their auditors and they didn't want information on there telling us who submitted that information. So every month we're getting big statements with hundreds of, well, not hundreds, probably 70 to 90 deposits, and we have no idea who it's from. So we can't give them credit. So we've been working with the bank, say, hey, you gotta give us something, you know, so we can. So anyway, it's been a big mess this year. I think we're kind of getting to the end of that. I think we're getting it caught up now, but as you can see, the middle column there, the activity year to date, we're only about half, I mean, we're through October here, and we're still only showing $489,000, but that's because there's a whole bunch of money that we just haven't been able to, it's in the bank, but we gotta figure out who sent it to us before we can record it. So we've actually collected a lot more than that, but it's a snag, but it makes it hard to predict where we're gonna end up. So that, it's kind of held that company up from being able to help us a whole lot with collections, because if you don't know whether someone's paid you or not, you can't go after them for non-payment. So hopefully we can get that resolved pretty quick. The next item that's kind of stuck in between those gray boxes is local community stabilization. That is the reimbursement from the state for delinquent personal property taxes that have gone away, that are going away. The state tries to reimburse us for that. We actually started receiving them in 15, but the state had us put it in a different account back in 15 and 16, and then they decided, oh, well, you know what, I think it should go in a different account. So now it's up there in that 441 account. So that's a few things that's going on with the revenue. If you flip to the next page, the only other two things I want to point out that are different, right above the gray box, retiree health care. If you look in 2018 column, we've been budgeting around $50,000 a year. That's at zero. That's not really any change to our revenue. It's just a change in how we're going to account for it. And that is for retirees who still get their health insurance through the city. In the past, we would pay it and then we would bill them. So we'd have a revenue and expense, and they just wash each other out. So we thought it seems kind of silly to clutter up the statements with that. Going forward, we will just pay it and put it in a receivable, and when they pay us, it'll just wipe out the receivable. So it'll be a balance sheet item going forward. So, and it has no effect on the bottom line, because like I said, there would be an equal amount of expenses offsetting that anyway. So it's just a change in our method of accounting, I guess. And the only other thing I'll mention on here, down near the bottom, we have gain on sale of assets. In 18, we're showing 47,000. We don't know exactly what that figure might be, but what we're gonna try to do, and I'll admit, I don't know if anybody's looked ahead, but the general fund was a little tight this year. As you're aware, public safety's been able to pick up a lot of stuff for us through the military, and some of the stuff they're using and they may be able to part with, and we're hoping that you know, once they get done with it, if we can part with it, we can get a little extra income. So we'll see where we end up, but that's what that is. So flipping to page 3, this is for city council, and nothing's changed there. Everything's pretty much status quo. There's no big changes, so no one has questions on that. I'll flip right on to 4. Everything's pretty much the same as it always has been on city council. So if I jump to page 4, city manager, the only two things, the only two things in there that
Shift change.
are kind of a unknown, and just to point out what they were, again, right between the two gray bars there. With the unknown, we had to put something in there just in case we have to do a payout. I hate to think that and go down that road, but we had to put something in there just in case, and that would be a net of all the things that could happen, you're gonna have a large chunk going out for a payout, but then you're gonna have a vacant position, so it's kind of a net of what it might cost us between here, or between now and the end of the year. And a little bit further down, this 802 account, contractual services. Again, if thinking the worst, trying to be conservative and thinking about this, we thought we might have to put something in for MML if we had to go out and look for him to fill that position. But looking back when we did it before, I realized that MML billed us at the end of the search and not at the beginning. Obviously, that would be something that would not hit until 18, if it even hits then. So, we ended up deciding to take it out and wait to see in 18 if, we have to go down that road. And if so, we can look at maybe a budget amendment or something at that point in time. Other than that, I have nothing different on city manager. Everything's pretty much the same as prior years. Next page is page 5, assessing. Everything's the same on assessing. The only thing I will point out is, if you notice in the past, they've had some small revenue, nothing too significant. Those were basically when people did not file the personal resident, or if they double filed their personal resident exemption, the state could fine them, or we get a share of the fine. But in all honesty, that law's been around long enough, and title companies and realtors, everybody are familiar with it, so we don't see a lot of that anymore, so we just took it out of the equation. Flipping over to page 6, we have the attorney, and again, nothing significant is changing. I believe there's a real slight increase for 18 being proposed, but again, nothing significant. Everything else is status quo from prior years. Flipping to page 7, and again, if anybody has questions, feel free to stop me. Page 7 is, where are we at here? The clerk. And the only significant change you'll see is down in elections, which is account 805. If you remember, 2018 will be an election year, so we've just built those in. That's the only change on the clerk one.
Did we,
Did I hear your question?
yeah, just one, with the new equipment, is that out of last budget, or was that a full grant from the state, or?
Full grant from the state, we didn't have to pay anything.
Okay.
Which is always nice. Page 8 is human HR, and there's no change in HR at all. Everything's status quo for the most part from prior years. So I will flip over to page 9, and that's finance. And again, the only thing I'll point out, which we've already talked about, is down in 802, the contractual services. That's the increase in 17 and 18 is for the third-party vendor to help us with those collections. One thing I will point out, though, if you notice year to date, we have not spent much in that account, and it's because of this glitch we had with the bank. So it's not like, and like we said when we proposed using that company, if we can't use them, they're not going to charge us. If they can help us, they'll charge. They charge us based on how much we use them. So they did help us get caught up a little bit last spring when all the tax returns were coming in. Other than that, we haven't. I mean, they're working with us with the bank, but they're not doing anything as far as charging us for anything right at the moment. So other than that, everything is pretty much status quo on finance. Going to page 10, City Hall or city municipal buildings. The only thing I'll point out, line 785 for this year is up quite a bit. And I just wanna point out, we're estimating we may end up somewhere around 45,000. And that is the elevator repair. If people remember when our elevator was down for, I don't know, a couple weeks, a month, whatever it was, and they had to, well, actually, we come to you guys and talked about whether we wanted to try to repair it or get some new parts or whatever. That's what that increase is from. Other than that, everything is the same as in the past, so
You said it was 785?
45,000. That's where we're projected. With the cost of the elevator repair was like, I wanna say between 15 and 20, I wanna say 20
I was
something,
like
20-some thousand.
17.
70, yeah, I was thinking between 15 and 20. And add that to other things that needed repairs. I know we did some repairs in the bathroom, there was a few other repairs around the city, so in total, we're projected we may come in around 45,000. One thing I'll mention too, for those of you that, again, that are new, it's kind of an odd thing, the way the auditors view these. If we're $1 short in 17 in the current year, if we go over by $1, they're gonna write us up. We can be off the other way by 100,000, then they don't care. So in 17, we're trying to estimate between now and the end of the year, we try to estimate a little bit high, because we definitely don't wanna, they literally have written us up before for being like $4 or $5 short, and it seems kinda silly, but they do. So 17 is, we're trying to look at worst case scenario between now and the end of the year. Page 11. This is cemetery. The only change really is the second line, the transfers in. We did increase that, actually, from 16 to 17, we increased it from 17 to 20,000. And going forward to 18, we're looking at increasing that to 30,000. And the transfer in comes from the cemetery trust fund. Do you want to talk on that, your idea on the perpetual care thing, or no? Or?
Well, some of you may recall that we've had conversations in regards to the perpetual care for the cemetery, and we have not been collecting those fees specifically for many years. And I'm drawing a blank on his name, who works in the cemetery currently. He's actually done an exceptional job of doing some of the research and attending. Patrick, yes. Attending conferences and getting some additional details in terms of how we can be fiscally responsible relative to the maintenance and care of the cemetery and its facilities. So one of the things that will be coming forward will be an ordinance relative to the operations, and then specifically identifying as part of the fees for the services that we will be again funding the perpetual care, so that we'll have ongoing maintenance. And with those dollars, then hopefully we'll either be able to contract for services or hire part-time help to assist them with the maintenance.
There was a number of years ago, there was a loan to the incubator roof.
Correct.
Was it ever paid back?
They are making payments to that every year, so.
Okay.
And that's the cemetery trust, which I think we get to later on here tonight. Other than that, everything else in the cemetery is the same as, I mean, more or less the same as what we've always done. And I should point out too, I guess I skipped over, when we did 18, that does take into account, our health insurance came in at 5.5% increase, I think, this year. So that is factored in, and then we factored in of course, it was a union negotiation year, so we've got the anticipated costs. Well, of course, we started a lot of this before the contracts were all done, but we build in those costs, the increase in wages and stuff in 18 as well. So, just in case everyone's wondering. So we're on 13? Or did I skip a page?
12.
Okay, got sidetracked. Public safety, oh yeah, can't forget that one. So there are a couple things that, public safety is actually a two-pager, so if you look at 12 and 13 together, the only thing I would like to point out on that is right above the bigger gray bar on the second page, on page 13, we have vehicles in there. We actually discovered today, there's a slight error. On 17, that 20,140 that we're projecting, that actually is a little low. There's another annual payment we had left off, so that amount will actually change to 32,898, and which is about a $12,758 increase. And these corrections will be made, of course, on the final the final budget that we bring to you in December. And then likewise over on the 18 column, that number's actually a little high. Kind of had to do with the timing of when these were paid, because they're annual payments. So that one can actually go down to 47. These numbers are getting too old for these small numbers. 138. That number can actually go down to 39,485. So we'll pick up about a $7,600. Our expenses will go down by $76.53. And again, that'll be reflected, and that'll be a key number to remember for a little later as I get near the end of this.
A quick question. So so the very first line item under revenues under public safety, the liquor licenses, is the department, is there a particular enforcement thing they're doing so that's going to that particular department?
Chief Kip can probably talk on that a little bit more, but my understanding is I think that's collected by the state and dispersed to us, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, that's dispersed to us to do enforcement. We do enforcement on a regular basis with the County Sheriff's Department, where we do sting operations throughout the county. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions on public safety? Everything else is pretty much the same. Revenues, obviously, we had the grant, and for the vehicles, so it shows up there for this year. But going forward, it's not in there. I don't think there was anything else that's changed significantly for public safety.
So another question. So you mentioned grants. I know there was the COPS grant, right? Is that with the two? Yes. With the two, I think we applied for 2 officers, right?
Because of the size of the department, we can only get 1 officer, so there's
Okay.
only 1 in there. We'd have to pay 20% of that.
Okay.
We have no idea if we're gonna get it or if, when that will happen, so
Okay.
we figured we'd just come back and ask for that, when that occurred, if it did occur.
So the 20% would be roughly.
For one officer, I'm gonna think here, because we had that built in a long time.
About 65, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. So probably 13,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And actually, a lot of it, honestly, it's interesting when you get looking at one individual. A lot of it depends on their health insurance plan. There's a very big difference between a single person and a family plan, so it makes it hard to give you a real close answer. I mean, 'cause it's almost triple, from, whoops, I'm sorry.
Well, and the hard part about building that into the budget right now is, we could get it now, which would be for the entire year. We might find out in March, would be 3/4 of a year, so the percentage is just gonna vary on when it comes through and when we can get somebody hired, so.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on public safety?
I have a question.
Sure.
And maybe the chief can help me out with this. When all of the things that are coming in from
Council, your mic.
all of the things that are coming in from the that you get from the military that they give to us, who is responsible for fixing the vehicles? Does it come out of our funds, or
Yes.
Does it come out of your fund?
We-
It
well,
comes out of the public.
Most of everything that we've done with those vehicles has come out of our forfeiture funds,
A forfeiture.
right, which is separate from the public safety general fund.
Okay.
Anything else on public safety? So jumping to 14, page 14, code enforcement. We have really no significant changes. Actually, that's a 2-pager too. It trickles down onto page 15, but, there's no significant changes planned right now for code enforcement. Cornerstone, obviously, that can, well, they got the new name now, Safe Build, I guess, but they can, you know, those can bounce around some, but it's pretty much a wash. If they, you know, if they collect more, they're just gonna bill us for it, and so, I mean, it's kind of a wash, so that $70,000 figure could go up or down, but again, it comes out down below in expenses, so it just washes, so, doesn't really, I guess, affect us a whole lot on how many, permits or inspections and stuff they do, because it, doesn't affect our budget a lot, other than the 10% admin fee we get, so. Other than that, everything's pretty much status quo on that one. Page 16, city maintenance, other properties around the city that are not, obviously not not the city hall, municipal buildings, but just other properties around. The only thing I'm gonna point out on this that's really a big change is if you look down right above the gray bar in the middle there, count 101,442,922 electricity. A huge drop. Don't get excited. All that is in the past, our street lights were paid out of this department. Because again, it's city maintenance, it just kind of fell into this by default. And looking into it the other day, I discovered that the state actually the state gives us like recommended account numbers to use so that all the cities are kind of somewhat uniform, consistent. I discovered they actually have their own department that they recommend you use for streetlights because it is such a significant number. So it's a big expense for, you know, all cities. So it's still in here, it's just gonna be a couple pages down. So all we did is just moved the streetlight expense from this department into its own new department, which you'll see, you know, in a couple pages down. Other than that, everything's pretty much the same. Page 17. Tree trimming, this is one where every year, whether it been Kevin, now Jim, Harry, every year they always ask, we need more money in there, we need more money in there. And unfortunately, that's one area where when the budget is tight, that's one area where we kind of go back in there to trim it, or trim, no pun intended. Well, we go into, go in and make some cuts in there. I'm sure they'd be, you know, love to see more money in there, but again, with the budget being a little tight, we kind of kept it about where it was in the past, so no big change on that one. Page 18, engineering. Most of the engineering, this kind of goes way back in when city had its own engineering person here in-house, but there's still some engineering when, anytime there's some engineering that's not tied to a specific, like, street project, or if there's some specific project, we will bill it or charge it to that department. But sometimes there's just things that you need some miscellaneous engineering services where you have to contract with somebody. That's what these are. So again, there's no change in that one. It's pretty much status quo from prior years. Page 19, this is where I was talking about the new department for streetlights. So the state recommends using Department 448 for street lighting. And as you can see, we're talking probably around 143, 142, somewhere in there. 1,000 a year, so it's a significant number. So we've been exploring different options of maybe we could, replacing some of the lights with more energy efficient lights. Unfortunately, it's very costly to do that, the upfront cost of changing the fixtures and stuff. So eventually, it's something, or even maybe if we could find grants or something, to help us with that or something. But anyway, so going forward, that's gonna be a separate.
Councilmember French.
How will we bill for our electricity if electricity is unused?
They have a formula. They come out and they're supposed to do an audit periodically to see how many of, matter of fact, we just had one done because we were looking at some other possible options. So one of the things to start that process, they came out and made sure their records were up to date by doing an audit, and they break it down by how many fixtures you have of the various types and how many watts. And then based on that, they factor in what the cost, what they feel the monthly cost of usage would be for that type of fixture, that type of wattage, and they calculate it accordingly.
There's no penalty to it with the failure to replace dead bulbs, right?
Well, it's funny you brought that up. We've talked about, because it is pricey, fix them all. We said, what if we just kind of do a few at a time? And they said, we got to be really careful because you get this new lighting, it's different colors, and then you got the old lighting, how you have some of them bluer looking, and they said it can be like a strobe. It could be distracting to drivers because you get different colored lighting according to them.
So a dead light is better than a blue light.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I guess.
That's their story and they're sticking with it.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably their sales pitch as to why we, do them all, I don't know. Page 20. Trying to remember what this one is here. Oh yeah, the EPA landfill. This is just where every year we get the monitoring, those wellhead, or the monitoring that Hall and Associates does for us. That's all that is, and that's set. I don't know, they give us an estimate so many years out in advance as to how much it's gonna cost. So, matter of fact, we just got another invoice on it this week, so the year-to-date figure will go up some, but it'll come up closer to our 8,800 that we're anticipating, because we just got another invoice on it. So no change in that. Page 21, the river trail. This was a new department we set up, and that was to account for the revenues, the grant revenues, and the expenses for the river trail. Can't talk, river trail. And we haven't got all the invoices in yet, but we do anticipate, or there's a pretty good chance anyway, that we believe that those will be all finished by this year. And Councilmember French, oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, Councilmember French.
Thank you. So someone asked me today about the trail and whether or not the city has a policy for its maintenance during this winter. There is no money in the budget for plowing. We probably should publicize the fact that we are not planning on plowing River Trail. We can probably spin that in a way that say it's now free and open for snowshoers and cross-country skiers, but I think that if there's an expectation, the grant didn't build into it a fund to regularly plow it.
Right.
And so I think that that's gonna have to be articulated to people who will likely want to know what we're doing with that trail.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Good point. And I think a lot of the existing trail kind of went along some of our existing sidewalks and stuff
Right,
too, so it
right.
wasn't such an issue before, so something to think about. Any other questions on that? 22, page 22. Parks. There is no, I got a note here. What's my note for here? Oh, there's not really any significant change in parks, other than I did wanna point out something, and probably here's as good a point, or good a place as any. Every year in the fall, the last few years, we would have maybe, or last several years, as long as I can remember, we would have, I don't know, $15,000-$20,000 of DPW wages going to leaf pickup. Those employees are, even though leaf pickups all changed, those employees are still gonna be coming to work and they're gonna be doing other things. It's kind of a guess. I was, talking with Harry, like, okay, where are they gonna be working? Well, it's a guess. So we did bump up, like parks, cemeteries, some of the streets, some of those other funds where those DPW workers that normally in past years may have been working in solid waste doing leaf pickup, now are going to be.
Councilor French.
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't know if anybody's been looking around the streets after our rains today and over the weekend after the rain last week. We've got an awful lot of leaves that are in the street. Blowing off of people's property or just landed in the street. Do we have a mechanism within our budget to handle that, or are residents expected to pick up the leaves that are in the street in front of their house? That's a general question, but I think, again, as we budget those things, I would argue that keeping 15,000 in this fund, if possible, would perhaps account for
Right.
the fact that we're still gonna have city workers picking up leaves.
Right.
May not be at the same scale that we've done in the past, but
Right.
there's an awful lot of public spaces that need leaf pickup.
Right.
So,
I think we thought about this a little bit in the solid waste fund, which is where the leaf pickup, department was before, so we were thinking that when we get to solid waste, which I think is Monday night, next Monday, we were thinking that too, that we probably wanna leave something in there for that. This was just kind of a guess as, will those DPW guys be out working somewhere else? And if so, where, we gotta account for their wages somewhere, but yeah, good point.
thanks, Tom.
I was wondering, Mr.
Councilman Reed.
Does the street sweeper take that?
I wondered that too. I don't have a good answer for you on that.
Probably not.
I mean, they may be able to do a little bit, but I don't think they can do the big, when there's big in piles.
Yeah, 'cause I was breaking my yard and I had 15 bags out there, but still, there was a whole lot of them on the street. Like Annie's saying that it was messy.
It's definitely gonna be a learning process for everybody, I think.
And you are all correct, and we've been sending out communications, particularly in the water bills and our electronic communications, asking residents to keep the street area clear of leaves, especially so that we don't have the drains blocked. So we're asking, but that doesn't mean everyone accommodates that, so we have to be realistic in terms of what's going to need to happen. So we've been reluctant this year to move those solid waste dollars for staff time to other places. What I don't anticipate us doing is having to hire the seasonal workers to accommodate those cleanups.
Anything else? Okay, going to page 23, Holland Park. All I can say on Holland Park for 18 is we know that as money comes in, or if Councilmember Reed has a project and gets grant dollars in, or let me rephrase that, if she has projects, grant dollars come in to cover them, or donations, or whatever. I did not know at the time I threw this together what projects may be going on out there, but I just stuck a number in there, equal revenue, equal expense, with the idea, I mean, that's kinda how it works, whatever comes in revenue is gonna go out in expense, or, you look at it either vice versa. So, it's not necessarily gonna be the 25,000, we don't have any particular project or nothing, it's just saying that if 25,000 comes in, I'm sure she'll find a place to spend the 25,000. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is if you have projects and if you're aware of things you're working on, grants or whatever, definitely come see us and we can adjust that number. It's not, it's a wash in the bottom, so it's not gonna change our bottom line at all, so. Moving on, page 24. General appropriations. A couple things here. The very first line, hospitalization insurance. This is the other half from up in the revenue section where I said, where we paid the employees, the retirees, health insurance, and then we would turn around and bill it and record it as revenue in the past, and then expense here. And again, that's just gonna go to a balance sheet transaction, so it's coming off of the income statement. So we took the 50,000 out of revenue. Here's where we're taking the 50,000 out of expenses. Another thing, right in between the first two gray shaded areas there, on this account that's 71901, that says MERS, defined benefit contribution. Even though we have closed that plan for all our new hires and have for a while, there are still retirees out there drawing on it, and there are still some employees that are in that plan from having been employed here prior to it being closed. But as you can imagine, with no new people going into it to contribute, and with as people age and more retire and start drawing on it, we're starting to tip a little bit to where now MERS is getting a hold of us and saying, you guys gotta start contributing some into this. So that's what that line is. And that particular one, that big jump, it still kind of puzzles me a little bit how we got into this predicament, but most of that increase going from 5,800 to 16 is for the nurses when the city had the hospital. There's still a lot of retired nurses who were employed under that plan that are drawing on it, and with no money having gone into that particular division for several years since the hospital's been sold, we're getting a big shift now where what we pay out each year is significantly more than what's going in. So now MERS is saying, and actually this is something we want to address at another point in time. We wanted to come back with you with some thoughts we had on this whole defined benefit plan to try to ensure that down the road we don't get upside down in this, where all of a sudden they're telling us you gotta pay in this huge amounts every year. So that's something we'd like to come back and discuss with you in a future meeting. Let's see. Down under miscellaneous, which is the, what is it? Actually the last account number, that 955 on page 24. You can see that's dropping quite a bit, and the big drop, that is where the city paid for the $50 sidewalk assessments for all of the city-owned properties. And since though that program ended this year, we did not budget anything in there for 18. So that's why that dropped. And I think that's about everything else is pretty much the same. So if we get to page 25, the page everybody wanted to see, because that's the last page of the general fund. So where are we at with all this? So if you look at 2017 projected activity to where we think we'll end up, right now we're showing $146,449 loss. Two things I'll add, that actually we gotta add that extra 12,000 from public safety, that adjustment, so really it's probably gonna be closer to 159,000. But again, keep in mind, the last few years, because of the way the auditors work, we're doing very conservative numbers in the current year column. In the last few years, we've come and said, we think we're gonna be, or we could, in worst case scenario, be a little short. And if you look back, we actually were well over that number. We came in very favorably. 15, we had a surplus of almost 89,000. 16, we had a surplus of 335,000, almost 336,000. So, I think that's going to be absolutely worst case. I don't expect it to be that bad. It may even be positive. It could be, it's again, we're trying to make sure we got everything accounted for and account for any things that may come up between now and the end of the year. Then looking at 18, we're showing it currently at about a $10,000 shortfall. But again, we got this $7,600 adjustment from the public safety one, so that puts it down to only about about $2,500, $2,400. And there's a few other things we're looking at. We might be able to adjust that $2,400 shortfall to get it down close to zero. So basically, we're saying we would probably be very close to our revenue and our expenses agreeing. And then having said that, even with the $10,000 loss, the important thing I guess everybody always asks is where does that leave us on our fund balance? Well, as you can see, we got a very strong fund balance. So even if we had the $149,000 loss this year and a $10,000 loss next year, we'd still be sitting at just shy of 35% fund balance. And again, I don't anticipate this year's to be that big. That's worst case scenario. Questions?
Oh, Councilman French.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you, Tom.
Welcome.
And City Manager Mitchell, that's a great looking budget. 10,000 in the hole, that's within the realm of possibility. That's basically a balanced budget in my mind. We'll be able to find 10,000 without too much difficulty, and that's
think so.
using conservative numbers. I think that's pretty well done.
The other, I have one request. I know usually in previous budgets, there's usually been like a listing of, I guess, roles and salaries.
Correct.
If it's possible before the next budget, can you include that for the next budget session?
Okay, and again, this was just the general fund
Oh, yeah.
piece. There's still a few more to go yet tonight. When I said last page, I didn't mean.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
There's
but,
some thinking there.
yeah, exactly. But you are correct. Generally, when we bring the whole packet to you, you're right, we have all that information in there. So we'll try to put something together on that.
And if I recall, that's normally a part of the salary and positions portion of the budget, so it's contained in that section, and we will be providing that. I'm very thrilled that we were able to come within a balanced budget because essentially our revenues are flat, but we've had increased activity. But I also want to call your attention to, there are some things that have not been addressed in this budget that many of you in the community have been asking about. And one of those, first and foremost, has been code enforcement. So if we're looking to do any enhancement in code enforcement relative to additional staffing and support in that area, we need to identify that funding as well. Also the sidewalk assessment, how and if you want to move forward with that and what that's going to look like. I already mentioned briefly the cemetery, any decisions relative to the medical marijuana facilities, those revenues as well as expenses have not been accounted for. If there's going to be additional training for council members, or if you want to have an actual designation for grant dollars, matches, to be designated within the fund balance. Those are some things you could be looking at. It was also mentioned in terms of tree trimming. We are still getting requests and we're already over budget. So do we want to be realistic in terms of what those allocations are going to look like? One thing that Tom did not mention, and it's still a little bit up in the air, and that's relative to our support services for the library. And we are looking at them transitioning to their own accounting system. And I haven't seen their adopted budget yet, but that conversation is ongoing, and that transition would probably start next year. So that could have an impact relative to our revenues, but it would also free up some staff time. So it's a benefit as well as a cost to us as relative to our operations. But those are ongoing conversations that have not been fully consummated yet. But those are things that are operating in the background. Some of those we'll be able to have some discussions about this year, even before the adoption of your budget. Some of those are going to have to wait until next year as things come into play.
Councilmember French.
Thank you. I know it's not really a good idea to be spending fund balance for everyday operations, but, I would hope that there'd be some sort of conversation with us about, what, a rearrangement of code enforcement might look like, or additions to code enforcement might look like. Clearly, it seems to me that personnel are needed. It's just a question of how you allocate those personnel and where they come from. But if we're projecting a no change at all budget of, with basically break even, there might be an opportune moment to have a conversation about whether or not, how much we would be willing as a council to, dip into that very healthy fund balance, at least in this first year, to sort of help address that immediate need in code enforcement.
Yes, and I wouldn't advocate, spending all of what's considered excess fund balance.
Right, no, I understand that.
And you did adopt a resolution that is still somewhat conservative. The state and national, government, general accounting practices recommend that it be somewhere between 15 and 17%, and we tend to be in excess of 30. So there is still, some significant funding that could be reallocated. Standard practices, however, tend to say that it should be for a one-time expenditure. It should not be for ongoing operations. So there's a lot to take into consideration as we look at what are really the priorities of the community and how can we make those opportunities through the existing funding.
If the council were to approve the medical marijuana, and I know it depends on the number of facilities and those kinds of things, income tax obviously would come to, well, I guess depending on where it was located. Income tax and property tax would come to the city, plus the licensing fees.
And the shared revenues.
Yeah. And that would just, let's say that was not in a tax capture district. That would just come straight to general fund?
Correct.
Okay.
As best I understand the state legislation, which is constantly moving.
So the question, I'm sorry about that, I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to switch one of these mics eventually because the mic is shorter here, but the question I was asking is, the council has yet to make a determination on medical marijuana, and depending on the number of facilities that we would authorize by granting licenses, depending on where that is, depending on where they're located in the city would have increased revenue to general fund through their income tax, the property tax, the licensing fees, and then you said the shared.
Yes, some of those expenses are designated for law enforcement training and
Okay.
support services. And just to clarify, even if it is in a captured district, it's not as though it's going to a foreign entity. It's still going towards a mechanism for economic development within the city of Albion. So it's not as though it's a drain on the city. It's just that those funds are designated for a particular area.
Councilmember French.
We'll be talking about that at our next council meeting, so, we are hoping that we'll have an idea, yes or no, next week.
Yeah.
So I guess in regards to that, are any of the things that were mentioned, and I think at the top of that is code enforcement, an area in which you would like to schedule a special study session to explore how best to address that, if at all, within this budget?
I would be fine with that because I had originally asked council on the 19th and that kind of morphed, but I think that's something that's worthy of a study session for that. I guess we can just schedule a date.
Yeah, I'll ask Clerk Jill Domingo to contact everyone to find out when might be the best date and time for everyone's schedule.
Anything else? The next two pages that say 1 and 2, these are actually, I tried to find a summarized version of general fund. And it's hard to do because there's so much that goes on in general fund, as you can imagine. I mean, there's more departments in general fund than any other fund, and I didn't want it summarized so much that it just said bottom line. So basically, what the page does for every department, it tells you the total revenue, the total expense, and then the net. assuming there are. Now, keep in mind, some departments like 000, the very first one, there are no expenses. That department is revenue, so there's only one line there, and then it gives you a total, but whether it helps you or hurts you, I mean, to me, it's almost more confusing looking at this than it did the detail, but then again, I look at the detail a lot more, so I don't know, we threw it in there. If you like it, you know, it's there, but it basically, the bottom line is telling me the same thing. If you look on page 2 of that, it tells you the same numbers in there, fund balance, and that we're gonna end up at the 34.9. I mean, it's everything, it's all the same, it's just summarized for every single department. Very, very, you know, consolidated. And one thing too, I wanted to add too, just so everybody understands it, is the state's definition of a balanced budget is to have enough revenues, adequate revenue and fund balance to cover the expense. So even though we may be short a little, or the way we presented it, we're saying we may be short a little bit in revenue, as you can see, we certainly have the fund balance to cover it. So in the state's mind, that's a balanced budget, so that would not be an issue that it shows negative 10,000, so if no other questions on general fund, I'll move on to some of these other ones real quick. And they're some of the easier, because general fund's so big, we tried to throw in some of the easier ones to finish up with, and they are gonna have a new sequence of page numbers, so we start with page 1 of 8. And that one is the bond. It's a debt service fund for the energy 425 generator. I going back ways, but there seems like there were several things we did when we did that bond issue. And all we're doing here is just like we've done in the past. We transfer money in from the departments and or funds who benefited from when the bond issue was done. And those departments transfer money into this debt service fund. That money then pays the annual bond payment. That's all we're doing. And there's no change from prior years on that one. Page 2. This one you'll get excited about. This one is the same type of thing, debt service, but it's a general obligation bond. This is the one that we have the debt service millage on your tax bill. That's where this money goes in to make the annual payment. The good news, if you look in 18, there's nothing in there. That's because the final payment for this bond is October of this year. So it's a big bond that is no longer in existence, so we paid off that one. So not much there for 18. Obviously, you can see there's maybe a little bit in fund balance when all is said and done. Once we see what our final collections are in taxes, and we'll just have to go down and adjust that out, and any excess would just roll into general fund. But you know, we're talking about $487 or whatever, so nothing too significant there. Page 3. This is the sidewalk assessment. I guess the thing is in 18, the thing to point out, I guess in 18, because the program ends this year, this will be the last year under the current program that we've been operating under. 17 will be the last year that they will be on the tax bill, so we did not show any revenues coming in 18. Now, if something changes, you know, if you guys decide to do something going forward, that's another matter, but under the current program, there would be, like I said, it would not appear on your tax bills next year, so there would be no revenue coming in for 18.
One question, so the $5,000 property tax chargebacks in 18?
Well, because bear in mind, the chargebacks are properties that don't sell at the auction.
Okay.
And those, if you think about it, they don't get to the foreclosure status until about 2 years after the fact. Mm-hmm. So if the county charges $5,000, just a kind of a guess, but if they charge us $5,000 in 18, that would be from properties that were delinquent in 15 that went to the county in 16, and then went through their collection process and didn't sell at auction. So we could actually have some chargebacks for a few years out.
So the explanation for that in the sidewalk assessment, though?
I'm sorry?
So but the sidewalk assessment, budget lines? Because let's say someone wasn't, so what you're saying basically is once they go into foreclosure, we're still paying back, is it 5,000 for their, I guess, delinquent sidewalk?
No, well, here's what they do. The county takes, at the end of February each year, the county says, okay, you're done. You cannot collect any more revenue from property taxes. And in March, the county buys all our delinquent tax bills, basically. So they are paying us, making us whole for anything that's unpaid. We transfer that unpaid taxes to the county. They go through the process of trying to collect it, and eventually, if they aren't paid, they will go try to collect it through foreclosure. If at the auction, nobody bids on the property, the county then will turn around and bill us back for the money that they paid us 2 years prior to make us whole. And they break it out by operating, debt service, they just like on the tax bill, they break it down for every parcel. So that would be the equivalent of the $50. Now, that's probably a high number, because there's probably not gonna be that many that.
And that was my question, is that basically the delinquent sidewalk assessment?
Yep, okay, sorry for the long
Oh, no,
explanation.
that's fine.
Okay,
That was good.
okay.
I needed it.
Okay. However, if you look down at the bottom, you can see that there is a fund balance in there. So we have not been, the way the money's come in, it's built up some, I guess, in the fund. And so even though we're doing some projects every year, we're not taking it to zero. It's over the 10 years, it's built up some. So we do anticipate still doing some projects in the next couple of years, which is how much, I don't know. Jim didn't have anything in mind yet, but we figure we threw 200,000 in there, for 18. I don't know, exactly if that's what we would spend, but there is some money in that fund to still do some projects, so that's why there are some expenses there, but not the revenues. Any other questions on that one? Page 4, this is the fire barn, it's called the ABA bonds, because there's actually 2 debts that are being paid out of this. There's the Maple Grove, when we did the renovation and expansion of Maple Grove, and there's also the fire barn. And again, it works just like all the other debt service funds. Either Maple Grove or Public Safety and Huron Valley Ambulance is paying into it to cover the annual bond payment, and then the money from those entities is used to pay the annual bond payment. So it's the same as we've done every other year, so. Any questions on that one?
That fund balance is growing a little bit too.
Yep, it is. And actually, yeah, it is. I'm getting it confused with the one in the ABA, but.
How far away or how long do we have left to pay for that? I remember from previous budgets, that was the one where it increased.
Yeah,
every year.
I'm trying to remember which one. The one matures in 2019.
Okay.
But the other one does not mature until 2028.
Okay.
Those are the ones in the trust.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It's on the shaded area on that page.
Page 5 is another debt service fund, and this is for the DPW garage. And again, the departments that use it all pay a little bit into it, and then that money is used to make the annual payment to the county for the purchase of the garage. That one matures in 2023. Page Page 6, Cemetery Trust. The one thing I will point out here, this is what Dr. Mitchell was mentioning earlier about the, no, I forgot the word for it, the future care of the perpetual, yeah. It's a Monday, and it's been a long day, I'll tell you. This was a fund where the perpetual care money came into in the past, and we have not put anything in there in a long time, but, there's still money in there from back when there was money coming into it. So this is where we bumped up, you can see the transfer out, where it's going from 20,000 this year to 30,000 next year, and would be transferred into the cemetery for the operations of the cemetery. Questions on that one?
So we'll be
Councilmember Long.
we'll be starting the perpetual care back this year?
I think my understanding was that was a discussion that you wanted to.
Right, it'll depend on how fast it goes through our own internal processes relative to the adoption of the ordinance.
Because I guess currently, cause my family had to go through that, but so basically there's it's like $500 for, I guess I'm saying in terms of the purchase and opening out stuff, like what percentage of that actually do we?
In the past, it was 50-50. Whatever the cost of the lot was, an equal portion went into this. So, forgive me, I can't remember exactly what our lot costs are right now, but if it were $400, we would charge $800, and $400 would go into the cemetery for the sale of the lot, and the other $400 would go into this fund for
Okay.
future care. That's how it worked in the past anyway, so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that one? Page 7 is the Albion Trust, which is, Colin mentioned earlier, that not only do they hold the bonds for the fire barn in Maple Grove, but they also have other investments and stuff, and obviously you're all aware that's the fund that we've periodically gone to when we've had some purchases and asked for some assistance from them on some of the purchases, but at present, I'm not aware of, obviously nothing come out in 18 or in 17, and I'm not aware at present time of anything anticipated coming out of that in 18, so there's nothing reflected as expenses or anything coming out. The only thing that shows is just some of the interest and stuff that we earned on the investments, so not much changed on that one. And finally, last page. This one is the Retiree Healthcare Fund, and this is that kind of a unusual, our first attempt at having a self-administered retiree healthcare fund. And it was in place for, I don't know, 8-10 years, something like that, but we're at a point in it now where it's a closed plan. There's only 5 members, I believe, in it, or drawing on it. They were former employees, or retirees now. And the way the plan is worded, when they reach Medicare age, they have to go to Medicare, and the payment comes down, the payment from this plan to them comes down substantially. So as you can see right now, we're paying about $2,500 a year to the 5, so it's not a big plan at all. It's kind of just a supplement to help, I guess, with their Medicare, again, it kind of was drawn up before my time, but I guess that was the understanding. It was kind of a supplement. The key thing, I guess, is, there's no money being put into that, but yet if you look down at fund balance, we're like, in 18, we're expected to be about 43,000. If you divide 43,000 by the $2,200, that comes out to about 19 and a half years. So that the amount that they're receiving won't ever go up the way the plan is in place, and no new members can go into it. So, if 19 years from now we run out of money and have to come up with a couple thousand each year from general fund or something, I guess, you know, that could be a risk, but I think it's a very small risk, so. And that's all I have, unless there are questions. I think I know what you're thinking, so.
It's like a, I think it's called like a timeshare when the people, you pull the money and then as people, pass away, it goes up or something. But that's not gonna, if something were to happen in, let's say, 1 year, there are a lot of deaths, what would happen to the,
I would have to go back and read on, I don't know if it ever addressed what would I mean, because, you know, when you draw plans like this up, you're always thinking of them as an ongoing thing, and I don't know if it really addresses, what would happen when you get to a point where there are no longer any beneficiaries. That's something that I guess I have not run into, but I don't know, I don't know if Colin's aware of any kind of legislation on a benefit plan like this, where all of a sudden all the members there are no members left, and is the money,
You have to research it.
yeah.
This is, I mean, not every community has stuff like this.
Yeah.
It's kind of
It's Albion.
unique to Albion.
any other questions, comments from council? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Back to my agenda here. Okay. Okay. If there are any public comments, we ask that you limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes and observe proper decorum. Please mention your name and address. Are there any citizen comments this evening?
Elaine Rice, 910 Irwin Avenue. We're disappointed that the meeting for tomorrow night has been postponed, and we understand that Councilman Spicer had a death in the family, and we're very sympathetic to that. But is this common procedure to cancel or postpone a meeting of this importance because of that?
The meeting that was scheduled yesterday, well, actually, I shouldn't be responding. Yeah, usually through public comments, the council doesn't respond, and I can respond after the end of comments. I can do that. So,
Okay.
any other?
Hi, I just wanted to remind you all of the Amazing Rake, which is coming up in less than 2 weeks. It'll be November 5th, 2 to 4. I hope you're reaching out to your constituents. We still have open slots for people to sign up. They can email me, so just grab a flyer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janice Best, 710 South Eaton. Along with what Elaine was saying, even if that had to be postponed, that's having it on the same day as Halloween makes it so that a lot of people can't get to it. And so maybe that could be changed, switched out with a Monday meeting. If it's a budget meeting, maybe you switch that out or something. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in it because there were a lot of people at the October 16th meeting. So there's obviously a lot of interest in it, and for people to have to choose between that and Halloween, whether it's taking their kids somewhere or passing out candy, or the volunteers that do the trunk or treat for people, organizations, that would be unfortunate to have them have to choose between those.
Thank you. Are there any further public comment this evening? Okay.
Can any of that be discussed at all? Can we bring that?
Well, yeah, I guess is there any further public comment? Okay, so originally I'll say that the I had requested council meet in a study session on the 19th to discuss code enforcement. And then after the 16th, I requested to change that to a special meeting. And I think 2 members of the council could not make that, so I rescheduled that to tomorrow. And then there was the bereavement, and I felt that, given the magnitude of what was going to be discussed, we needed all 7 council members in attendance. And so I just moved it to the next Tuesday, because usually, from my experience, council, when we meet, and I will commend the council and the administration and staff, we've probably met more, in terms of relative to the time frame within a year's period, we've probably met more in this year than in 6 years of me being on the council in terms of special meetings, work sessions, those kinds of things. So usually what I've noticed is that Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays work best. And sometimes we have to kind of go away from that, but I just put it on the next open Tuesday. So, so Councilmember Reed and Councilmember French.
That is Halloween, and my church has Hallelujah night that night.
Okay.
Of which I have to be with the 3 to 6-year-old.
Okay.
So, and I go to church in Lansing, so I am not
Okay.
available.
Okay. Councilmember French.
Could we, as suggested, move the budget meeting to Tuesday and move the council meeting to Monday?
It's possible. Yeah.
I would highly recommend that. That will allow our citizens and our council people to be at that meeting.
Okay.
Because that's the day that we typically have council meetings. So
Okay.
move the budget meeting to Tuesday.
Okay. So what I'll do, I'll send out an email to council tonight and just confirm that everybody's cool with that. And then we'll let you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other, public comments over. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved in second. All those in favor say yes. That's actually, that's the correct charter.
Yes.
Those opposed say
Yes.
no. Okay.
So let me get some understanding here. So
Oh,